Welcome and great to have you join us as we go off script with Sam Monk, Senior Leader of Equippers Church. Enjoy today's podcast.
Well, welcome along to episode 13 of Off Script with Sam Monk. We're talking about what's worked, what hasn't, and leadership lessons.
Wow, it's great to have Scott on the podcast with us.
That's good to be
some
here.
of you wouldn't be familiar with his voice, but how about, Scott, you just introduce yourself a little bit. He's on team with us.
Yeah, been on team, I guess been part of the Equippers family now for about 10 years and been part of 2 different locations, but been in part of the city campus for the last 7 or so years and part of the team here.
Yeah, and originally from?
The mighty Thames.
Thames Valley. Many people listening to this won't even know where Thames is.
It's part of the Coromandel Peninsula, the best part of New Zealand.
So it's great to have Scott on the podcast. Jake's abandoned us. He may or may not come back, but we'll see how Scott does today.
Yeah, it depends how this episode goes. But we are diving in, having a conversation, especially around creativity, the importance of creativity, what it is. Creativity often people's minds, you instantly go to the arts, but understand it's far bigger than that. So, yeah, do you want to jump in there? What's really creativity as we unpack that?
Well, would you say you're creative?
Yeah, in certain ways.
Yeah. So a lot of people, when it comes to creativity, they do confine it to the arts. People can sing, dance, paint, and different things. But I believe creativity is not a category of people. We're creative. In fact, we're created in the image of God, who is creative. He is creative. And so, I think a lot of people limit themselves because they don't actually believe they're creative. And so this, podcast probably today is how do we unlock the creative juices that are within each and every one of us?
Yeah, because that's a good thing, because it is, people often will discount themselves on being creativity. So then the question goes, well, how do we, if there is creativity inside of all of us, how do you go about starting to unlock?
Yeah. And I think it's with business people, it's with accountants, engineers, they just, creativity is multifaceted. It's not just one-dimensional. And because a lot of people don't see themselves as creative, a lot of people don't engage probably at the level that they could, or, really it's an untapped source, or it's an unused potential that lies within a lot of people. Yeah.
And a lot of our listeners today will be leaders in different spheres, different environments, and even the role creativity has in leadership. Obviously, being part of the team here for a few years now, I've seen, even through your leadership, just the different creative ideas, expressions, strategy that come through. Do you want to even talk about what is the importance of creativity in leadership?
Yeah, well, I think, ideas are today's currency, and there's good ideas and bad ideas. And so, how do you take, an idea to a place of implementation, and how do you, create filters to work out whether, this idea is translatable or not. And I think that is a big challenge in leadership. And I think today, in today's world, we need to be creative, because the environment we're living in demands it. And in fact, I'd say that the limitations that we face are actually great servants to unlocking creativity.
Yeah, well.
So often we've let our limitations define us rather than seeing the limitations around our life as servants. In fact, the best creativity has often come from a place of limitation, hardship, struggle, all those things.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Out of those things, has come new ideas. It's almost like the hardship has drawn out drawn out creativity. And, as just being on team, I often say to our guys, lazy thinking is throwing money at something. And so often we can get into lazy thinking and just thinking money's the answer. But actually, ideas and creativity are our currency. And there's always a way of doing things.
Yeah, and just even in terms of that, because there's obviously some situations when pressure comes on, it's just stay in faith, hold on, believe for breakthrough. But then there's other situations where it's like, no, we've got to get creative and innovative here. And how do you kind of, as a leader, even or just even in business, whatever your sphere is, know when it's just a time to hold on and believe, and a time to actually rethink and get creative? How do you kind of manage that?
Yeah, well, I think a key thing is identifying what's your responsibility and what's God's responsibility, and I think that line's really hard. But I always like to think if it's a God idea, if you got a conviction, there's always a way.
Yeah.
There's always a way, and God makes a way where there's no way. And so that, in fact, how I define creativity, I got challenged once to come up with my own definition, and my own definition of creativity is finding answers in hidden places.
Yeah, well.
Finding answers in hidden places. And so the role of a leader is to find a way through this. There's always a way of doing it. In fact, I say this on team quite a bit. There's always a way of doing this. We haven't thought about it yet. We just haven't thought of the answer yet, or come to that answer. And so, let's try and make a way. We may not have the budget. We might not have the people. We may not have but there's always a way. And that comes really from the belief also that God's given us what we need.
Yeah.
It's in our hands. Our answer's not outside of us. It's in our hands, but we've got to look at what's in our hands correctly and look at it from His perspective.
Yeah, great. And, even on that same line of that, because then often people get this big creative idea.
Yeah.
And then, but it's that ability, I guess that's where leadership comes into play, but even just watching it, being on team, seeing your journey, this ability to have a big idea, but it doesn't just remain an idea, to actually take this creativity and put motion to it. Do you want to unpack?
Yeah, well, taking an idea, how do you determine what's a good idea, whether it's a God idea? I think part of it is whatever you get agreements around. And I think my role is to create a little bit of a framework.
Yeah.
But my role is not to do all the colouring in.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of leaders wear it carry things heavy because they think they have to colour everything in.
Yeah, true.
Whereas, often I'll come with just a bit of a framework, throw it out, and then it's people with other gifts and graces come and do the colouring in, and then we get agreement around it. And so, even when it comes to ideas, you might come with a good idea, but people come in, if you're rigid about what the idea is, then you're going to limit what others can contribute to that idea. So, I like just throwing things around, as I often do, and
we know too well,
and seeing what lands. And used to be on team, I'd throw things around, and people go, "Is he serious?" And some things I'm just throwing around, and sometimes I'm not serious. And so I'll propose the idea, but I'm also prepared to let go of it. But I'm not prepared to let go of the mission. But the way we go about doing it may change.
Yeah, and even if you want to unpack even a bit more about how you have been able to create an environment, around where we operate and stuff, you do create this ability for us to throw ideas around and talk about ideas without feeling hemmed in or locked in. And then out of that often will come the idea, but we don't always start with that. Sometimes it's just this ability within teams for people to throw ideas and not be held held to it as such.
Or be caught at it. Yeah. Oh, that's a dumb idea. Yeah, I think there's got to be a security in the team to be able to do that, you can throw around things. And I think the ability to retract is really important. So many people, throw out an idea and then they realize it's, people may criticize the idea and then they don't retract. They try and justify why they came up with that idea. And I think people are good on team at saying, "Oh, nah, that was a dumb idea." And so having that safety and that security to be able to do that. And even as a team, when we've bought into our idea and it hasn't quite worked out, it's just going, oh well. To being able to cut that loose. And I think it's the same with any sports team, is you want people to have the freedom to express themselves without the fear of being dropped if they make a mistake.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because that's the tension, sometimes if we don't we start down the road of an idea and then we feel like, oh, we better fulfill this or see this through, and we must try and make it something it's not.
Yeah.
And that's that. But is there any kind of ways you go about, like, I guess once you've started an idea or you've got these creativity filters you use, or in terms of how do you determine if it's just a nice creative idea or if as it resonates as, no, I think this is a God thing?
Yeah, well, I think the mission side of things is really, really important. Like, I think there's creativity that kills because people actually are servant to creativity. So creativity is the goal, whereas we make sure that the goal or the mission is really clear. That needs to be clear. How we get there, we may have some alterations on that. I think that's really important. So, a lot of people today, musicians, and they serve music, but music is just a means to an end. It's not the end. And I think, really having those things in right perspective. And so you got creativity that kills, but then you got stuff that kills creativity. And, some of that can be just language, which causes people to lock up. They don't have the freedom to voice their opinions, give feedback, or verbalize what they're thinking on the inside. And so how do we create an environment where people can add to stuff? And even just since being on team here, I've noticed whenever we hit roadblocks, it's pretty quick that you'll start throwing around how do we break through those ceilings. That's a pretty natural response of noticing your leadership is when you hit a ceiling, okay, how are we going to break through it? Is that something you developed, or is that a gift you're given? Like, is that in terms of that? Because for some people, is that something that you've had to work on, or is that? I think that's part of a little bit of the leadership gift.
Yeah.
But it's also something that's been developed over time, and I think you get a confidence when you see God working in an area and where you can keep progressing, and you see things stuff that takes place that's beyond your capabilities, and you go, okay, and I think that's one thing, it's developed through perseverance. But it's also that foundational belief there's always a way. If God's in something, if God's given birth to something, it's in your heart, it's in your soul. Whatever He births, He sustains, and He will complete. If we give birth to something, we have to sustain it. And we have to carry it right through. And so that confidence really comes from the fact that God's birthed it. It's been formed in my heart. It's come by revelation. He sustains it, and He will bring it to completion. And I think that's something that's got to be bedrock. In your spirit.
Yeah, that's awesome. And something, I heard you saying multiple times, and even starting out early on my leadership journey, you always feel that pressure to always have to come up with new. Whereas creativity, in a sense, isn't always just coming up with a new thing. I've heard you say, often in leadership, you're just saying the same thing in different ways.
Yeah.
And you want to just unpack that for a bit.
What are we, episode 11? Are we saying the same thing in different ways? One thing I've found is, because when you're not changing your mission, and where you're going, that doesn't change. You don't want to come up with a new mission every couple of years, or but how you're saying that is different, and you're seeing it from a different perspective. And I think creative ways of saying the same thing brings new life, brings a freshness to things, which brings engagement, which I think is really, really important. And sometimes the biggest obstacle you got to get in your head is this feeling like I'm a broken record. But I've found, in leadership, you don't know when the penny drops for people. It may be the 4th time, it may be the 7th time, it may be the 18th time. Sometimes, you'll get somebody else coming in and they're saying the thing that you've been saying for years, and it's like, somebody gets, Yeah, and you're going, I've been saying that.
They're amazing. You're like,
But in the end, you don't worry about it.
Yeah.
The goal is the penny dropping.
Yeah, good.
And if the penny drops, the mission's accomplished.
Yeah.
And so, you can't be too precious as to where the source.
Yeah.
If they get it from me, get it from you. If they get it from wherever they get it from, long as they get a revelation, a greater revelation of God and a greater revelation of how His kingdom works.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for that conversation today, Sam. I hope you got something from that, all our listeners. If you did take something away, we just encourage you, why don't you like, share, let some people in your world know. Otherwise, you can tune in for the next episode of Off Script with Sam Monk.
Thanks for listening to Off Script with Sam Monk. If you found this podcast helpful, make sure you pass it on. We love your feedback, so drop us a line about what topics you'd like to hear about on Off Script with Sam Monk.